Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. In today's video, we're going to briefly break down the tactical battle between Mikel Arteta and David Moyes as Arsenal edged a narrow win over West Ham. When we break down the game and we do look at the board, we have Arsenal in a 4-2-3-1, and we saw West Ham revert to a 4-4-2. When we look at West Ham's overall defensive shape, what we end up seeing here is that we have Haller and we also see Mikel Antonio looking to step towards the center backs. So we have Haller stepping out to David Luiz, and we do see Antonio stepping out to Mari. But what was key here was that we ended up seeing Dani Ceballos drop off a bit deeper to try and get on the ball. And what those West Ham attackers did was that they ensured that they kept in between Ceballos so that Arsenal defenders wouldn't play the ball into him. That essentially helped out West Ham's overall shape because now you could have Mark Noble stepping out into the path of Xhaka. And we also saw Declan Rice keep his position in that center of the pitch. Mesut Ozil varied his movement and he often looked to receive the ball out in the right touchline. And Ozil's positioning was very interesting because he often looked to drift towards that touchline and he shifted across into space ahead of Fornals to try and get on the ball. He wasn't trying to get it in between the lines or to either side of Declan Rice, and Rice never looked to push out into that position. The reason why Rice didn't have to shift down to that position was based off the fact that you had Socrates, who wasn't really going to offer you much of an attacking threat down that right-hand zone. So Fornals kept a narrow position. He didn't have to shoot out into Socrates unless he did pass half. And if Ozil looked to drift out into those areas to possibly try and create an overload, it wasn't working because you had Fornals narrow, looking to ensure that West Ham maintained their shape. And if Ozil drifted onto that position, he was able to shift out and close down Ozil. You had Nicolas Pepe holding the touchline ahead of Aaron Cresswell. And like I said, that midfield battle was pretty content for West Ham. There were times where we did see Xhaka drop off a bit deeper to push Bukayo Saka forward. But whenever that was the case, you would see Mikel Antonio drop off a bit deeper and looking to try and close down that avenue. So essentially that did kind of negate what West Ham were doing because as Haller was stepping out to David Luiz, Ceballos was getting on the ball, but Ceballos' threat from deeper positions wasn't harming that West Ham backline. Ceballos tried to play some defensive splitting passes, but they were cut out by Fornals and Bowen. And frankly, Ceballos was constantly shifting out the ball out into the wider areas, but they were safe passes, and he wasn't really influencing the game from deep. When you look at Arsenal's attack, it was pretty much as we expected it to be. Aubameyang was looking to run across Ngakia, and that would create space for Saka to push ahead of Bowen. And down that right-hand side, you had Pepe against Cresswell, struggling to make an impact. And when you look up front, Nketiah was often isolated, and he was struggling to get the better of Diop and Ogbonna, and frankly, that was down to him lacking service around that final third. So if you have Xhaka and Ceballos struggling to impact the game from deeper positions, and Ozil not looking to get the ball between the lines and shifting out into those wider zones where he is occupied, you would have to question where Arsenal were creating their chances. Ozil did try to move central, but when he dropped off deeper, Rice did look to close him down. But besides that, they were devoid of options. Where they were able to find their openings was through Pablo Mari, because what you end up seeing here is that when West Ham kind of did drop off into that 4-5-1, what you have there is you have Haller marking out David Luiz, Antonio stepping out into the path of Xhaka, and if that is the case, like I said, you can have Noble step into the path of Ceballos, or just have West Ham maintain that narrow shape that he wasn't breaching. But that leaves Pablo Mari as the spare man, and he was constantly playing positive diagonal balls out into Bukayo Saka, out into Aubameyang, and out to Nicolas Pepe. So when we look to a few examples to see how Arsenal were able to get into good positions, it stems through Pablo Mari. And the first one ends up seeing him try to play a diagonal ball for Aubameyang, looking to run across Ngakia. But the ball is somewhat short, and Aubameyang is able to break it down. And he also locates Bukayo Saka running off Bowen. So with that 2v1 advantage, Aubameyang plays the ball into Saka, but his low fist cross into the 6-yard box is desperately cleared by Diop. And we saw something similar occur later on in that half, where once again it was Pablo Mari, this time locating Saka running off Bowen Bowen. So Saka receives the diagonal ball ahead of Ngakia, and then we have Aubameyang shifting narrow ahead of Bowen to serve as a passing outlet. Saka ends up playing a quick 1-2 with Aubameyang to bypass Ngakia, but once again, when he gets into that good position, it's Diop who's at the front post, clearing that cross to ensure that Nketiah can't get on it. Besides that, the only chance that Arsenal did create stemmed from a short corner kick, where Aubameyang eventually looped the ball into the box and Socrates had a free header to knot it off the crossbar. But that is the only avenue where Arsenal were consistently getting into good positions. It was Saka running off Bowen, Aubameyang looking to run across Ngakia, and those two were able to combine. But Diop and Ogbonna did a very good job of keeping Nketiah out of the game, despite the fact that he was also starved for service. Meanwhile, when you truly assess that first half, it was West Ham who got into the better goal-scoring positions, and it stemmed through Arsenal mistakes. When we look to one example, what we end up having there is Pablo Mari splitting Haller and Antonio to find Ceballos dropping off a bit deeper, but Ceballos is pressed by Noble, and Ceballos ends up dropping off the ball into the path of Xhaka, shifting out into that left channel so Bukayo Saka could push forward. But what ends up happening there is that when Xhaka gets on the ball, he's looking to split Noble and Bowen, as we have Nketiah dropping off deeper ahead of Declan Rice. But when he tries to play that pass into Nketiah, Bowen is there to intercept it, and he cuts across Ceballos in transition to fire a low shot under Leno and off the post. When we break down the other example, it stems through Arsenal's traditional template route to goal in this game. We had Mari sliding the ball across Bowen into the path of Bukayo Saka pushing forward, and his low cross once again was cleared by Diop. It fell into the path of Ngakia and he squared the ball to Bowen, and Bowen ended up playing the ball beyond Xhaka into the path of Antonio, dropping off of Pablo Mari. What Antonio does well here is that he's able to spin across Mari and play the ball to Fornals, who's dropping off narrow ahead of Socrates. And when Fornals gets that ball, he's able to split Mari and Ceballos to find Mikel Antonio breaking into that right channel. That's vintage Antonio working the channels while using his physicality to get the better of the center back. And here he's in a 2v1 situation with Haller and David Luiz. But what ends up happening is that as he breaks towards goal, Haller breaks in towards the 6-yard box, and Antonio plays his pass just behind him, and that play is killed. But as you can see, in that first half, Mikel Arteta's tactics weren't working. Defensively, they struggled in transition and were getting bypassed. Luckily for them, West Ham didn't have the final finish. And when you look at their attacking approach, it was solely Bukayo Saka who was getting into good positions, but when he tried to find Nketiah, Diop was doing a very good job of clearing those lines. So going into the second half, we're expecting a tactical shift from Arteta, but we didn't really see much. What ended up happening here is that West Ham slowly became more of that 4-5-1 rather than that 4-4-2, because we had Mikel Antonio dropping off into that midfield bank, sometimes in a central position with Bowen to his right, or sometimes just holding down that right wide touchline position, but for the most part he was looking to step into Xhaka. Arsenal were trying to get the ball into Nketiah on a consistent basis. We had Ozil and Aubameyang trying to play balls in behind as Nketiah ran across both center backs, but in both situations, the pass didn't meet the striker. Nevertheless, when it did, it stemmed through Bukayo Saka. Once again, what we end up seeing here is Ceballos clipping a diagonal ball out into Saka, making the overlapping run and receiving it ahead of Ngakia. And what happens here is that we have Xhaka pushing forward ahead of Bowen, who is offering support, and we see Antonio looking to track that run to ensure that he closes down Xhaka. But what ends up happening here is that when Saka receives the ball, he plays it into Xhaka and gets it back, and he runs across Antonio, runs across Noble, and then he locates the run of Nketiah darting into left half space. So Saka plays a pass in between Bowen and Diop to reach Nketiah breaking into the left half space, but his effort from around the 6-yard box was saved by Fabianski. On the other hand, we did see more of Arsenal without the ball in spells in that second half, and they ended up dropping into 2 banks of 4, and that is where West Ham were able to get more of the ball because there was no pressure on Rice and no pressure on Noble. And when we saw them create one of their better chances of that game, it saw Declan Rice slide the ball across Nicolas Pepe into Cresswell, and Cresswell in an advanced position plays the ball around Socrates And he also bypasses Haller, who is occupying both center backs, and it falls to Antonio, who is peeling off of Saka, but his knotted effort is saved by Leno. Arteta did turn to his bench by bringing on Lacazette for Nketiah, and eventually we did see Reiss Nelson come on for Pepe, but the key player in that second half was a West Ham player, and it was Bowen, who was constantly causing a threat in transition and in Arsenal's third. Initially, you saw him intercept a Ceballos penetrative pass at the edge of the box, bypass Ceballos by playing it to Noble, and then Noble bypassed Xhaka to play it back to Bowen, and Bowen was able to break at the Arsenal backline, cut across David Luiz at the edge of the box, and force Leno into a save. Later on in that game, we ended up seeing Diop play a long ball into Antonio, backing into Saka, and Antonio nodded the ball into Bowen, who spun across Ceballos and ended up playing a reverse ball across Xhaka and Mari into the path of Haller running across David Luiz, and he flicked his effort on goal that Leno was once again forced to push away. And the final scare that Arsenal did receive in that game ended up seeing Ngakia receive the ball ahead of Aubameyang, and he played it around Aubameyang for Bowen dropping off of Saka. Bowen isn't closed down by Saka tightly, and he's allowed to turn as Aubameyang does look to close down Bowen. But what ends up happening there is that Ngakia makes an overlapping run off Aubameyang, and while Aubameyang is asking Saka to get across to close down Ngakia, he doesn't do that, and Bowen splits Saka and Aubameyang to find Ngakia, breaking down that right channel. And what we locate is Haller running across both of the Arsenal center backs, but when Ngakia plays that ball into the 6-yard box, David Luiz makes a last-ditch effort to get across Haller and ensure that he can't get his shot off, and Arsenal were lucky to get away with that there. Nevertheless, Lacazette will steal the headlines for getting the winning goal, and the one area that we can assess there is the fact that once again it was Pablo Mari who was involved in the build-up. It was Mari who did split Bowen and Noble to find Aubameyang dropping off Ngakia in a narrow position and flicking the ball out to Bukayo Saka on the overlap, and once again it's Saka cutting across Ngakia and squaring it to Aubameyang, and from there, that's how the shot was deflected, and it allowed Ozil to nod the ball into Lacazette to ensure that Arsenal did claim all 3 points. But when you break down that game as a whole, West Ham deserve a lot of credit here. Defensively, they stifled Arsenal's attacking options in the center of the pitch, and Arsenal only had one legitimate route to goal, and that was through Bukayo Saka, who improved largely in the second half, but simply it wasn't enough as their attacking players in Aubameyang and Nketiah and Nicolas Pepe were starved for service. Whereas when you look at West Ham, as you could see defensively, much more improved despite the fact that they never really coped with that Bukayo Saka threat. And when you look at them from an offensive standpoint, they were devastating in transition. They forced Arsenal into mistakes higher up the pitch. And in that second half, Bowen proved to be the best player on the field. And frankly, when he put his team into good positions and when he got into good positions, they simply didn't make the most of their chances, and Arsenal were able to escape with all 3 points here. Hi everybody, thanks for watching, and subscribe here for your latest tactical analysis and daily commentary on the InnerViews show. And if that wasn't enough, don't forget you could find more organic, unfiltered soccer/football analysis on the InnerViews podcast, the best soccer/football podcast in the world, available on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and any Android apps on your Android devices.